Following that song, Namaste.
Namaste.
My inspiration for this theme, Ala Buddha, today, it comes from last week, a seminar at the Shin Buddhist Temple down on Market Street. A two-part seminar on the subject of Hindu Buddhism, that kind of thing. And to kind of qualify, my background in this has to do with a lot of art history, but in particular focusing on the art history of Asia and India. And in particular, I had two graduate papers. My first graduate paper is Buddhist art. My second was Mexican art history. So that's what I'm kind of starting with as an introduction here, to bring something in that I brought into the seminar, kind of almost like you say a little show and tell. Here, focus on here, this is a replica made from the actual head, so it's been made from a mold like that. And it's from eastern Afghanistan, called Bactria, and about 3rd century, like that. And I had it, but I've also found out the particular of what it is because around 1950, an archaeology magazine had the original of this head featured, on the cover, so I could find out exactly, it was in the museum at Kabul, and it is from the province of Hara, there in the Tarim or Central Asia, like that. And so the idea in terms of Buddhist art is, its inception, how it's, evolved, and its culmination, which I pretty much focused on Japan, because it was so evident there. And at the early stage, these figures, paintings or whatever they are, featuring the human as the main central there, and Buddha, are for edifications and narrations. They are not made like the Hindus, or at least until later, for veneration. So that's what they are. They're educational that way. Kind of start and put it in a simple way that where the whole history of Central Asia is extremely complex. You can pull out any one thread and do anything on that. Scythians, as they were called, from way up north, they called the Pontic Caspian Sea. They came down into the Greek world and they caused a lot of trouble there. And then they kept on moving somehow into Afghanistan, in East Afghanistan, called Bactria. And however that they came in contact at that time with the teachings or the Dharma of the Buddha caused them to bring about the first Buddhist art there. And very interesting there, because you can see with the features of this is Apollo. And Apollo, the whole thing of the Greek art sculpture, which happened a lot earlier, is really prompted by the Pythagorean theories that was picked up by the sculpture of Phidias, and he made the great Athena in the Parthenon. And this pretty much focus I'm trying to establish in Greek sculpture something really basic, fundamentally valid, Pythagorean's theory. And so that's what continued to make the Buddhist art so important. So here, the artists, they're quasi-Greeks. They're not, real blood Greeks. But they carried that teaching here until they made this kind of feature here. So it's very interesting because we can kind of look at what later developed in more of an East Asian Buddha. Everybody sees, here we have an earlier look of looking at Mr. Buddha, Gautama Buddha, as his clan is relative to the Scythians, the Saka clan. And his hairstyle later evolved into an Ushnisha, protuberance on top of the skull kind of thing. But it seems the warriors, or the Kshatriya class, of which Gautama was, wore their hair this way. So that's one way that you could kind of see that. I also have an image of a deer here because I had mentioned the core or substance of the Buddha's teaching was on suffering. All Indian schools were focused on the subject of suffering, what to do about that. And Gautama began in Deer Park, he began his exposition with, I have only followed the path that others have followed, and I have found something that everybody else overlooked. And that's then what he revealed. He revealed what he found called the truth of suffering and its cessation, which comprised the Four Noble Truths. So Deer Park, so that in Buddhism, the deer is always standing for Deer Park in that way. And here I wanted to bring this because it's the only painting that I have that would go with this subject. I really did this painting for Gary Snyder's poem of the Azure Medicine Buddha, which I did here not too long ago. And some of the features that I have in this, the previous seminar, the week before the one I'm referring to, Hinduism and Buddhism, also I want to show that Hinduism and Buddhism is not really different, it's not really separate. That kind of happened because Europeans encountered Buddhism in Asia long before they ever went to India. By the time they came to India in the late 19th century, Buddhism had already been reabsorbed into Hinduism. That's the way we were calling it. But ever after, as far as Europe and the West goes, Hinduism and Buddhism seem to be treated as they're two different things, which absolutely are not. Kumaraswamy, the scholar, 19th century, 20th century scholar, he said, Buddha was born a Hindu, lived a Hindu, and died a Hindu. You know, so all that. So some parts of the ancient Southeast Asian kingdoms, like Khmer, actually portrayed Buddha and Shiva as one and the same thing. So, and the Buddha's family was also of the clan of Shiva. And anyway, here in my painting, I have kind of like that. In place of the Ushnisha, this is Kaliska. This is Mount Kaliska, the home of Shiva. There. So that's the way I have all that in here. And my real treat today is a really good poem by Mary Oliver. I love it. The Buddha's last instruction. Make of yourself a light, said the Buddha before he died. I think of this every morning as the east begins to tear off its many clouds of darkness, to send up the first signal, a white fan streaked with pink and violet, even green. An old man, he lay down between two solid trees, and he might have said anything, knowing it was his final hour. The light burns upward, it thickens and settles over the fields. Around him, the villagers gathered and stretched forward to listen. Even before the sun itself hangs detached in the blue air, I am touched everywhere by its ocean of yellow waves. No doubt he thought of everything that had happened in his difficult life. And then I feel the sun itself as it blazes over the hills like a million flowers on fire. Clearly, I'm not needed. Yet, I feel myself turning into something of inexplicable value. Slowly, beneath the branches, Buddha raised his head. Are you listening? He looked into the faces of that frightened crowd. And as he fades back into the branches, the snow goes on falling, flake after perfect flake.